Hello, dear readers. Today I bring you a story that transcends time, a narrative that was born in the slave quarters of Imperial Brazil, but echoes deeply in our contemporary hearts. It is a story about family, identity, unconditional love, and the transformative power of human dignity. Prepare to meet Rosa, a woman of silent courage, and Joaquim, a child who grew up between two worlds. A story where secrets whispered in the coffee fields transform into truths that liberate souls. From where are you joining us on this journey? Leave your city in the comments. And don't forget, if this story touches your heart, leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more narratives that connect the past to the present. Opening. Year 1851. Location: São José Plantation, Paraíba Valley, Imperial Brazil. The secrets of the slave quarters. The dawn of March arrived dressed in rain and secrets to São José Plantation. The wind lashed the coffee fields like an invisible whip, and the big house seemed to sigh under the weight of heavy clouds that dragged across the Paraíba Valley. In the main bedroom, between hand-embroidered linen sheets, Dona Isabel Vasconcelos gasped in pains that seemed to tear not only her womb, but all the dignity cultivated in her 28 years of life. Her chestnut hair stuck to her sweaty face, and her blue eyes, normally serene as Sunday mornings, now reflected an ancestral fear. Dona Gertrudis, the midwife with calloused hands and wisdom inherited from generations, moved through the room with the precision of one who had brought hundreds of souls into the world. Her dark skirts whispered against the polished wooden floor, and the aroma of cinnamon and lemon balm that always accompanied her mingled with the metallic odor of blood and the jasmine perfume that emanated from the soaked gardens. "One more, my lady," murmured the midwife, and her voice carried a strange hesitation. The first cry tore through the air like an omen, then the second, both vigorous, full of the rebellion of one who had just been expelled from the aquatic paradise of the maternal womb. Isabel, between tears of relief and exhaustion, extended her trembling arms to receive her children, but when the third baby came into the world, a thick silence settled in the room. The newborn's skin did not possess the rosy pallor of his brother's. It was copper-colored, like ripe coffee under the afternoon sun, and his hair formed tiny dark curls. Terror painted itself on Isabel's face like spilled ink on white canvas. Her hands, which moments before had extended anxiously, now trembled like leaves in the storm. "Get rid of this creature," she whispered, her voice broken into fragments of desperation. "Make it disappear before anyone sees." Dona Gertrudis remained motionless for an instant that seemed eternal. She had known this family for decades, had witnessed births and deaths. Keeping secrets was part of her profession, but something in that moment weighed differently in her chest. Outside, between the pillars of the back veranda, Rosa watched. Her 38 years had been sculpted by hard work, hands that knew cotton, backs that carried burdens, eyes that learned to read signs invisible to whites. The rain ran down her black face like uncried tears, and something in her maternal heart sensed the tragedy unfolding beyond those walls. When Dona Gertrudes emerged through the back door, carrying a bundle wrapped in embroidered sheet, Rosa needed no words. The fate of that child was written in the midwife's grave countenance. The storm outside seemed to echo the interior tumult of the plantation, and Rosa, with silent steps that slave life had taught her, took in her arms the burden that would forever change the course of São José. Thunder rolled through the valley like omens, and rain washed the earth as if wanting to purify the sins that were planted there alongside the coffee. What secrets would be born from that March night? Rosa walked between the coffee rows like a wandering soul seeking redemption. The baby in her arms barely moved, wrapped in the sheet that still held the lavender scent of the big house. The fine rain that persisted since dawn had turned the earth into red mud, and each step of the woman sank, as if the very earth tried to swallow her along with her secrets. The wind whispered ancient melodies among the coffee leaves, songs that her grandmother used to sing in times when the world seemed simpler. But nothing was simple in that March dawn. Each drop of rain that wetted her face mixed with the tears she could not contain. Ahead of her, outlined against the leaden sky, rose the abandoned slave quarters, a construction of wattle and daub with clay tiles that once housed entire families, now haunted only by the echo of laughter and conversations that the wind still carried. It had been 3 years since cholera had claimed its last inhabitants, and since then the place remained forgotten at the limits of the property. Rosa pushed the worm-eaten wooden door, and the creaking of the hinges sounded like the lament of the dead. The interior smelled of mold and dry herbs, but also of memories, the sweet odor of pipe smoke from old João Griot, the aroma of cassava porridge that Aunt Benedicta cooked on Sundays, the perfume of coconut soap that Esperanza used to wash her children's clothes. In the most protected corner of the old dwelling, Rosa arranged a wooden box that had served to transport tools. She lined it with the cotton blanket she had brought hidden, and with a mother's care deposited there the child that fate had placed in her hands. The baby opened his eyes for the first time since birth. They were dark as wet earth, but possessed a strange light, as if they already carried with them the wisdom of those born to fight. Rosa felt her heart tighten like a closed fist. "God must know what he does," she murmured, her voice mixing with the sound of rain on the roof. "God must know." She kissed the tiny forehead, and the gesture held all the tenderness she could not openly demonstrate. Then, with steps heavy as the conscience that tormented her, she left the quarters and returned to the path between the coffee fields. When she arrived at the big house, Colonel Francisco Vasconcelos had just returned from his trip to Rio de Janeiro. The 45-year-old man bore the fatigue of the road on his face and the feverish gleam in his eyes of one who had just witnessed the transformations shaking the empire. The Eusebio de Queiroz law had changed the landscape of work on the plantations, and winds of change blew ever stronger over the Paraíba Valley. "How were the births?" he asked, his voice hoarse from a man accustomed to command. Donna Gertrudes, who awaited on the porch with grave countenance, responded with measured care. "3 births, Colonel, but only 2 survived." Isabel, still pale and trembling, confirmed with a silent nod. Her eyes did not meet her husband's, as if they carried an invisible weight. Francisco observed the 2 boys who slept peacefully in their carved mahogany cribs. They were identical in innocence, perfect in the fragility that only newborns possess. A proud smile illuminated his sun-weathered face. "José and João," he declared, as if baptizing 2 little princes, heirs to the land and the coffee that flourishes upon it. Rain continued to fall over the Paraíba Valley, washing sins and planting seeds of a future that no one could yet imagine. In the forgotten quarters, a baby cried softly in the solitude of night. Who would save that child abandoned among the ghosts of the past? 5 days dragged by like 5 years in Rosa's tormented heart. Work in the big house continued. She kneaded bread before dawn, swept the corridors when the sun appeared over the mountains, served meals with the same silent precision as always. But each gesture carried the weight of guilt that gnawed at her entrails like chiggers. In the dawns, when sleep fled like a frightened bird, Rosa found herself praying to saints who perhaps did not want to hear a slave. Her prayers mixed with the laments of the wind that swept the coffee field, and each whisper was a plea for forgiveness for what she had done, and an appeal for the child she had left in the abandoned quarters. On the 5th morning, when mist still clung to the hills like a ghost reluctant to depart, Rosa could resist no more. With furtive steps of one who has carried secrets for generations, she headed once again to that place that had become the center of her nightmares. The door of the quarters creaked with the same phantasmagorical sound as days before. Rosa prepared to find only silence and perhaps a tragedy that would pursue her for the rest of her life. But when her eyes adapted to the humid penumbra of the interior, a miracle awaited her. The baby was not only alive, he was rosier, stronger, and beside him, a wild goat with greyish hair tenderly licked the child's little face. The poor female, who had lost her own kid to forest predators, had found in that abandoned newborn a purpose for her maternal instinct. Rosa knelt right there, on the packed earth floor, and the tears she had held back for days flowed like summer rain. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, of renewed hope. It was as if the oryxars of her African grandmother and the saints of the colonel had made a celestial pact to save that life. "Joaquim," she murmured, savoring the name she had chosen during sleepless nights. "You shall be Joaquim, gift of God to one who did not deserve it." From that day forward, Rosa transformed the abandoned quarters into a secret dwelling. She brought food scraps, old clothes, stolen caresses. The wild goat, whom she baptized Esperanza, became the silent companion of that child who grew between 2 worlds. 2 years passed in this dance of secrets. Joaquim learned to walk in the haunted corridors of the quarters, to speak his first words to the shadows of those who had lived there, to smile at a mother who could only visit him in hiding. It was when Rita, Rosa's daughter who had already turned 10, began to notice her mother's absences. The girl possessed the sharp intelligence of those who learn early to decipher the adult world, and her clever eyes noticed that Rosa saved pieces of bread, hid sugar in small packages, talked to herself in the dawns. On an afternoon when cicadas sang loudly in the trees, Rita followed her mother. Her bare feet made no noise on the dry earth, and she moved with the feline ability of children accustomed to playing hide-and-seek with life. When she saw Rosa enter the abandoned quarters, when she heard the tender voice conversing with someone, when she witnessed the affectionate kiss on the forehead of a tiny child, Rita understood that she was witnessing one of the greatest secrets of São José plantation. "Mother," she said when Rosa left the quarters. There was no accusation in her voice, only understanding that went beyond her years. Rosa trembled like a leaf in the wind, but when she met her daughter's eyes, she saw there not judgment but complicity. "Is he my brother?" asked Rita, with the simplicity of children who can see truths that adults complicate. "He is your milk brother," responded Rosa, and in those words was all the history she could not tell. From that day forward, Rita became the guardian of the secret and Joaquim's playmate. The abandoned quarters filled with muffled laughter, games invented with pebbles and sticks, songs whispered so as not to arouse suspicion. And Joaquim grew, oblivious to the complexity of his origin, but already demonstrating an intelligence that shone in his dark eyes like stars in the closed night. What encounters did destiny prepare for those intertwined lives? The year 1857 brought to the Paraíba Valley hotter summers and more generous coffee fields. In the big house of São José plantation, José and João completed their 6 years like two little masters who already knew the taste of power before even understanding its nature. The twins' mornings began with baths in French porcelain basins, warm water perfumed with rose petals brought from Dona Isabel's garden. Dom Estevão, the Portuguese priest with white beard and severe gaze, awaited them in the library with lessons in Latin and mathematics. The boys wore starched linen shirts, English wool pants and polished leather shoes that reflected the light from windows like small mirrors. José, the elder by 15 minutes, already demonstrated the natural authority of the firstborn. His blonde hair always combed, his erect posture even at 6 years old, the way he looked at slaves with a distance that seemed hereditary. João, in turn, possessed a more contemplative nature. He liked to observe butterflies dancing in the garden, to ask questions that left Dom Estevão thoughtful, to smile at Rosa when she served lunch. Meanwhile, 6 kilometers away, in quarters that time had forgotten but love had rescued, Joaquim also completed his 6 years in a completely different reality. His curly hair had never known an ivory comb, only Rosa's caring fingers that smoothed them with castor oil. His clothes were colorful patches that told stories, a piece from the colonel's old shirt, another from a dress that Donna Isabel had discarded, a third from a sheet that time had yellowed. His bare feet knew every stone on the path, every protruding root, every puddle that formed when it rained. But there was something in Joaquim's eyes that shone with the same intensity as the brothers he had never met. A living, curious intelligence that Rosa fed with stolen lessons she had learned by listening to Dom Estevão through door cracks. "A-E-I-O-U," repeated Joaquim, drawing letters in the earth with a stick, while Esperanza, the goat that had become his animal mother, grazed peacefully beside him. Rita, now a 13-year-old girl with an adult's responsibility, divided her time between chores in the big house and secret visits to her foster brother. She brought news from the world beyond the quarters, stories of the white boys who lived in the main house, sweets stolen from the pantry. "They have books with colored pictures," she told him, sitting on the doorstep while Joaquim played with little dolls made from corn husks, and a wooden horse as big as a calf. Joaquim listened to these stories with fascination, imagining a world that seemed as distant as the stars that shone over the coffee field. But there was no bitterness in his curiosity, only the natural interest of children for everything different from them. The only shadow in his days of guarded freedom were the moments when Rosa arrived at the quarters with eyes red from contained tears. Joaquim still did not completely understand why his mother cried, why he could not live in the big house like other children, why he needed to hide when he heard strange voices approaching. "Why can't I play with the boys from there?" he asked one afternoon, while watching smoke rise from the big house chimney in the distance. Rosa knelt before him, took his small face between her calloused hands, and searched for words that could explain the inexplicable. "Because you are too special for them to understand yet," she replied, her voice choked. "But someday things will be different." And in those words was all the hope of a woman who believed in divine justice, even when human justice seemed deaf and blind to her. Afternoons in the quarters were filled with improvised lessons, invented games, stories told by lamplight. Joachim learned about the world through Rosa's accounts, about his African grandmother who could read the future in the stars, about distant lands where people like them lived free. While in the big house, Dom Esteban taught the twins about empire and conquests. In the forgotten quarters, Rosa taught Joachim about resistance and hope. Two worlds, one same thirst for knowledge. Two childhoods, one same starry sky. When would these worlds finally meet? The night of St. John 1857 arrived at São José plantation, dressed in fireworks and the perfume of mulled wine. The stars seemed to compete with the rockets that exploded over the valley, and the air carried the sweet aroma of roasted corn, corn pudding fresh from the pot, and hot wine that boiled in copper cauldrons. The big house gleamed like a jewel set in the dark landscape. Colored glass lanterns hung from the verandas, and windows poured golden light over gardens where guests from neighboring plantations conversed and laughed. Colonel Francisco received visitors with the proud hospitality of one who possessed one of the most prosperous properties in the Paraíba Valley. Donna Isabel, wrapped in a turquoise silk dress that enhanced her eyes, circulated among the ladies with the elegance of one born for that life of privileges. Her jewels sparkled in the lantern light, the gold cross at her neck, pearl earrings that were her mother's inheritance, the diamond bracelet that Francisco had brought her from Rio de Janeiro. José and João, dressed in miniature sailor suits, white pants, striped blouses, and blue berets, ran among the guests like two little princes in their particular kingdom. Father Dom Esteban tried to keep them close, but the excitement of the party and the gleam of fireworks was irresistible to 6-year-old boys. "Stay where I can see you," warned the priest, but his words were lost in the boom of a bomb that colored the sky green and gold. It was then that José, always the more adventurous, pulled his brother by the hand. "Let's go to the stream. They say from there you can see the fireworks reflected in the water better." João hesitated for an instant, looking toward Dom Esteban, who was animatedly conversing with the vicar from a neighboring parish. But the prospect of adventure overcame prudence, and the two twins escaped through the gardens toward the small watercourse that meandered in the back of the property. The full moon silvered the path between fruit trees, and the sound of the party gradually mixed with the murmur of running water. It was when the boys reached the stream's edge that they saw a small figure sitting on a smooth stone, an improvised rod in hand, fishing under the moonlight. Joachim raised his eyes upon hearing footsteps in the wet grass. For an instant, time seemed suspended like a dewdrop about to fall. The three boys contemplated each other in silence, and something deep and inexplicable passed between them, a strange familiarity, as if they recognized each other from ancient dreams. "Do you catch fish at night?" asked João, his voice loaded with genuine curiosity. Joachim smiled, and in that smile was all the simplicity of children who know no prejudices. "At night they become braver. They're not afraid of the rod." José and João approached the bank, fascinated with that child who seemed to emerge from an adventure story. Joachim had sun-bronzed skin, hair loose in rebellious curls, and wore simple but clean clothes. But there was in his dark eyes a vivacity that the twins recognized as familiar. "I'm João," said the younger of the twins, sitting beside Joachim on the stone, "and this is José. We live in the big house." "I know who you are," responded Joachim without malice or resentment. "My mother works there. She says you're smart." "And you? What's your name?" wanted to know José, intrigued by that child who seemed to know them. "Joachim. I live over there." He pointed vaguely toward the coffee fields without specifying where exactly. The three spent the night fishing under the moonlight, exchanging stories and muffled laughter. Joachim told about Esperanza, the goat who was his friend, about the little birds that built nests in the quarters, about the stories that Rosa told him. José and João spoke of books with pictures, the wooden horse, Dom Esteban's lessons. There was between them a strange harmony, as if they were pieces of a puzzle that fit together naturally. They gestured similarly, had laughter that echoed in harmony, demonstrated the same living and curious intelligence. When the last rockets exploded in the sky and the party began to disperse the guests, the twins knew they needed to return, but something had changed that night by the stream. "Do you come fishing here other times?" asked João, hopeful. "Almost every full moon," responded Joachim. "Then we'll see each other," said José, and there was a promise in his voice. The twins returned home with small fish in their hands and a great mystery in their hearts. Joachim remained alone on the stream's bank. watching the stars reflect in the water and feeling that his life had just gained a new and inexplicable dimension. In the waters of St. John, three destinies had met like tributaries of a river that still didn't know where it was flowing. What secrets would these encounters reveal? The lunar encounters became the best-kept secret of São José plantation. Every month, when the moon hung in the sky like a silver lantern, José and João escaped from Dom Estevo's vigilance and walked to the stream where Joaquim awaited them with his fisherman's patience and his smile that disarmed any suspicion. José, always observant, began to notice strange details in Rosa's behavior. When she served lunch, her eyes sometimes lingered on them with a different intensity. When she passed through the corridors carrying extra food, she murmured something that sounded like prayers. And there were moments when he found her standing at the kitchen window, looking toward the coffee fields with an expression the boy could not decipher. João in turn felt increasingly connected to Joaquim. There was between them a friendship that transcended differences of origin and class. They conversed about everything: forest animals, stars in the sky, books that João was learning to read with Dom Estevano. And when Joaquim asked intelligent questions about the lessons, João felt pride in sharing the knowledge. "Why don't you go to school?" asked João on one of those nights, while they observed a school of silvery fish dancing in the water. "Rosa, my mother says I learn better alone," responded Joaquim, without lying completely. Dom Estevo, a 40-year-old man with sharp intuition, also began to perceive changes in the twins' behavior. They asked questions about slavery that seemed to come from real experiences, demonstrated knowledge about life in the quarters that they could not have acquired only from books, and there were moments when he surprised them, whispering about subjects that stopped abruptly when he approached. On a September afternoon, when the priest was organizing books in the library, José approached with the shyness of one who carries heavy secrets. "Dom Estevan, may I ask a question?" "Of course, my son. If a child is born, different from the family, but is good and intelligent, can she still be loved?" The priest slowly put down the book he was holding and studied the serious face of the boy. There was in the question a depth that went beyond childish curiosity. "God loves all his creatures, José, and true love sees no colors, counts no surnames, it sees only souls. So such a child could have the same rights as other children?" Dom Estevo felt a shiver of understanding run down his spine. He knelt before the boy, placing his hands on his small shoulders. "What are we really talking about, José?" The boy hesitated, loyalty to Joaquim battling against the need to understand truths that escaped him. But something in the priest's kind gaze encouraged him. "There is a boy, a friend of ours. He's our age, he's intelligent, he's good, but he doesn't live in the big house. And I think Rosa knows something about him." Dom Estevo closed his eyes for a moment, as if praying a silent prayer. When he reopened them, there was in them a light of understanding mixed with concern. "Where do you meet this boy?" "At the stream on full moon nights." The priest rose slowly, as if carrying a new weight on his shoulders. He had known the Vasconcelos family for years, had baptized José and João, knew of the rumors that sometimes circulated among the slaves, and now, piece by piece, a puzzle was beginning to form in his mind. That night, Dom Estevan sought Rosa in the kitchen after the family had retired. The woman was washing the dinner dishes with mechanical movements, but the priest noticed how her hands trembled when he approached. "Rosa, we need to talk." She raised her eyes, and Dom Estevan saw there fear and fatigue. The weight of years keeping secrets was written in every line of her face. "It's about the boy, isn't it?" said the priest, his voice soft as a confessional. Rosa dropped the plate she was holding. The sound of shattering glass echoed in the kitchen like a shot in the dawn. "Dom Estevan, she began, but the words tangled in her throat. "You don't need to deny, my daughter. You just need to tell me the truth. I swear I will keep the secret." And there, in the penumbra of the kitchen perfumed by spices and anguish, Rosa told everything: the March storm, the birth of the triplets, the abandonment, the miracle of the goat Esperanza, the years of stolen love and hidden care. Dom Estevan listened in silence, and when she finished he only said, "God uses the most humble for his greatest miracles, Rosa. You saved a life, and perhaps you saved more than you imagine." From that night on, the priest became the silent guardian of the secret, and one more link in the invisible chain that connected those 4 lives in the loom of destiny. When would the truth finally come to light? January 1860 brought to the Paraíba Valley suffocating heat and tensions that boiled beneath the apparently tranquil surface of São José plantation. The boys were already completing 9 years, and with them had also grown the complexity of feelings that united and separated them. José had developed over the months a silent obsession to discover Joaquim's identity. His sharp eyes of an intelligent boy captured details that previously escaped him. How Rosa always saved leftovers from the best foods, how she disappeared for long periods in the afternoons, how she whispered prayers that mentioned 3 children when she thought she was alone. João, in turn, had built with Joaquim a friendship that transcended explanations. He brought him borrowed books, taught him letters and numbers drawn in the sand of the stream's bank, shared dreams and fears with the naturalness of one who finds a kindred soul. Joaquim had grown strong and clever in the forgotten quarters. His intelligence shone like a diamond polished by the stolen lessons that Rosa brought him and by the natural wisdom of one who learns life by observing stars and listening to the wind. But something in his chest had begun to hurt, an inexplicable longing for a family he did not know, a questioning about his origin that Rosa always answered with loving evasions. The crisis exploded on a Sunday afternoon when the family was receiving visits to discuss the war rumors that came from the capital. Colonel Francisco had gathered in the library with other farmers to debate the conflicts that were taking shape on the horizon and the changes in imperial politics. José and João were playing in the garden when they heard fragments of the adults' conversation, words about blood, inheritance, legitimacy, and it was then that José, with the determination of those who can no longer bear living in ignorance, decided to confront his father. He waited for the moment when the guests departed and Francisco remained alone in the library, studying maps and correspondence. The boy entered the room with firm steps, his heart beating like a war drum. "Father, I need to ask you a question." Francisco raised his eyes from the documents, noticing something different in his son's posture. There was there a seriousness that seemed disproportionate to the boy's 9 years. "Speak, José. There is a boy on the plantation, a boy our age who lives hidden. I think he is our brother." The silence that followed was so dense it seemed to suck the air from the library. Francisco turned livid, his hands clenched over the papers, and for a moment José feared he had made an irreparable error. "Where did you hear this story?" asked the colonel, his voice low and dangerous. "I didn't hear it. I saw it. I met him. Joaquim exists, father, and João knows him too." Francisco rose violently, knocking over the chair. His eyes seemed like 2 burning embers when he shouted for Rosa. The woman appeared in the doorway in seconds, as if she had been waiting to be called for a judgment she knew was inevitable. "Is it true?" roared the colonel. "You hid a child all these years?" Rosa remained erect, the dignity that no whip had managed to break shining in her eyes. "It is true, Colonel. I saved the life that the mistress ordered thrown away." The confession echoed through the house like thunder. Isabel, who was embroidering in the adjacent room, dropped her frame and ran to the library, arriving in time to hear Rosa continue. "I raised your son with love, with care, with respect. I taught him to read, to pray, to be a good man. I did what a mother does." Isabel leaned against the doorframe, her face whiter than her linen embroidery. Francisco looked alternately at his wife, at Rosa, at José, who watched the scene with a mixture of fascination and terror. "Bring that child here. Now," ordered the colonel. Rosa nodded and left, walking with slow but determined steps. José ran after her, followed by João, who appeared attracted by the shouting. The 3 walked in silence through the coffee field to the quarters where Joaquim awaited them, playing with little dolls made from corn cobs. When Joaquim saw the brothers arriving accompanied by Rosa, he knew instinctively that something fundamental was about to change. He stood up, smoothed his simple but clean clothes, and walked to meet destiny with the courage of those who have nothing to lose. The walk back to the big house was the longest in the lives of all involved. Joaquim observed everything with curiosity, mixed with apprehension, the illuminated windows of the house he had always seen from afar, the perfumed gardens he had never stepped on, the luxurious interior he knew only through Rosa's descriptions. In the library, Francisco and Isabel waited. When Joaquim entered the room, the silence was absolute. The 9-year-old boy, with his curly hair and copper skin, looked at the bearded man he knew only from glimpses, at the elegant woman who had never seen him, at the brothers he now understood were really his brothers. Francisco studied the child's face like one deciphering an ancient map. He recognized there his own eyes, the shape of the hands, the way of inclining the head when thoughtful. Paternity was written in every feature of that face. "What is your name?" he asked. his voice lower now. "Joachim, sir," responded the boy, his voice clear and respectful. "Who gave you that name?" "Rosa, sir. My mother." Isabel sobbed, and in that sob were 9 years of guilt, of fear, of poorly slept nights. Francisco ran his hand through his hair, as if trying to reorganize thoughts that had become tangled, and it was then that Dom Estevo appeared at the library door. The priest observed the scene, Joachim standing in the center of the room like a small defendant, Rosa beside him as protective guardian, the twins flanking the newly discovered brother, Francisco and Isabel, as judges of an intimate tribunal. "Perhaps it is time to forgive," said the priest, his serene voice cutting through the tension. "To forgive is divine, and to recognize a son is human." The storm that struck São José plantation that January afternoon forever changed the course of 4 lives. The secret that Rosa had kept for 9 years had finally come to light, and with it, the possibility of a redemption that none of them imagined possible. What would recognition bring to that divided family? The days that followed the revelation were like walking on broken glass. São José plantation seemed to breathe differently, as if the coffee fields themselves whispered secrets that had been freed after 9 years of silence. Francisco had locked himself in the library for 3 whole days, emerging only for meals he took in sepulchral silence. His eyes, normally firm and decisive, wandered through the house as if seeking something he had lost and could not find again. Isabel remained in her quarters, compulsively embroidering towels she would never use, as if each stitch could ease the guilt that gnawed at her chest. Rosa continued her domestic chores with the same precision as always, but there was a strange lightness in her movements. It was as if carrying the secret for so long had curved her back, and now, freed from the weight, she stood taller. Joachim remained in her company, sleeping in the back room she had shared with Rita when her daughter was small. José and João did not know how to behave before the new reality. They constantly found themselves observing Joachim with a mixture of fascination and recognition. It was impressive how gestures that seemed natural in the two were repeated in the third brother. The way of frowning when concentrated, the manner of tilting the head to listen better, the smile that began in the eyes before reaching the lips. Dom Estevo had become the silent mediator of that family drama. He circulated through the house carrying words from some to others, planting seeds of understanding in ground still fertile with resentments and fears. It was on a February morning, when the first neighbors began arriving for the traditional monthly meeting of farmers, that Francisco made the decision that would change everything. He dressed in his best frock coat, combed his beard with extra care, and went to the back room where Joachim was helping Rosa fold clothes. The boy immediately stood up upon seeing the man he now knew to be his father, but Francisco gestured for him to remain at ease. "Joachim," he said, and the name sounded strange in his voice, like a new word learned belatedly. "Today you will be present at the meeting, as my son." Rosa let escape a sigh that carried 9 years of answered prayers. Joachim only nodded, with the seriousness of a child who learned early not to ask unnecessary questions. "But first," continued Francisco, "you need to dress appropriately." He took the boy to the twins' room, where João immediately offered his best clothes. The navy blue wool pants fit perfectly, as did the white linen shirt and embroidered vest that Isabel had sewn with such care. When Joachim looked at himself in the room's mirror, for the first time in his life, he saw reflected the image of a young gentleman. But it was the moment of descending the stairs that proved to be the most difficult. Isabel waited at the foot of the stairway, dressed in her best moss-green silk dress, the family jewels shining discreetly at her neck and ears. When Joachim appeared at the top of the stairs, she inhaled deeply, as if about to dive into deep waters. The boy descended slowly, one hand on the polished jacaranda banister, his eyes fixed on the woman who had borne him but never raised him. When he reached before her, Isabel extended her trembling hand and touched his face with the delicacy of one touching something sacred and fragile. "Forgive me," she whispered, and in those 2 words was all the weight of a mother who chose fear instead of love. Joachim looked into Isabel's blue eyes, the same eyes that José had inherited, and responded with the simple wisdom of a child raised in true love. "There is nothing to forgive, mother. Rosa taught me that love is not divided, it multiplies." It was then that Isabel broke down, not in tears of self-pity, but in the liberating cry of one who finally accepts her failures and chooses to begin again. She embraced Joachim forcefully, breathing the scent of a clean and well-cared-for child, feeling in the thin arms the life she had almost wasted. The main hall of the big house had been arranged for the meeting. Colonel Mendez from the neighboring plantation had already arrived with his wife, as well as Dr. Bernardino, the lawyer who handled the region's political interests, and 3 or 4 more influential proprietors of the valley. When Francisco entered the room, accompanied by the 3 boys, the silence was instantaneous. Everyone knew José and Juan, but the presence of the 3rd boy, visibly mixed race but dressed with the same elegance as his brothers, caused immediate strangeness. "Gentlemen," said Francisco, his firm voice echoing through the room, "I present to you my son Joaquim." The murmur that followed was like wind in a mature coffee field. Glances crossed, eyebrows raised, cognac glasses remained suspended in the air, but Francisco continued impassive. "Joaquim was born the same night as José and Juan. He is a triplet with my heirs, and therefore an heir as well." Colonel Mendez, a 60-year-old man with rigid opinions, coughed uncomfortably. "Francisco, are you sure of what you're doing? The legal, social implications?" "I am completely sure," cut Francisco. "Dom Esteban will witness that I recognize Joaquim as legitimate son. The documents will be provided still this week." Dom Esteban, who had remained silent, then stood up. "Gentlemen, we witness today an act of justice and courage. Colonel Francisco chooses to do what is right before God, regardless of what men might say." The meeting continued in a tense climate, but Joaquim remained beside his brothers during the entire time, participating when questioned, demonstrating the intelligence that Rosa had cultivated for 9 years. When the neighbors departed, some shaking their heads in disapproval, others secretly admiring the host's courage, San Jose Plantation had been definitively transformed. That night, for the first time in 9 years, 3 brothers slept in the same room. Joaquim occupied the extra bed that Francisco had ordered installed, and before falling asleep, he heard João whisper in the dark, "I always knew you were special. Now I know why." And José from the other side of the room completed, "We are 3. We always were 3. We just took time to accept it." In the kitchen, Rosa prepared the next day's breakfast, humming softly a song her grandmother had taught her. Rita, who had arrived from the neighbor's house where she worked part-time, hugged her mother from behind. "It's over, Mother. The secret is over." "It's not over, daughter," responded Rosa, a smile illuminating her tired face. Now it begins. What new challenges awaited that newly reunited family? The years that followed Joaquim's recognition brought profound changes, not only to San Jose Plantation, but to the entire Paraíba Valley. Colonel Francisco's courageous decision echoed like a stone thrown into a calm lake, creating waves that spread through neighboring properties and parlor conversations in the capital. Some farmers withdrew their greeting, considering his attitude an affront to traditions. Others, secretly admired by his courage, began to look differently at their own mixed-race children who lived in the quarters. But Francisco bore the criticisms and admirations with the same serenity, like a man who found peace doing what he considers right. Joaquim flourished under Dom Esteban's formal education. His intelligence, sharpened by years of furtive learning with Rosa, absorbed knowledge with impressive veracity. He learned Latin with surprising facility, devoured books of history and philosophy, demonstrated special talent for mathematics and rhetoric. José developed as the natural heir of the family business. At 15, he already accompanied his father in coffee negotiations, demonstrated acute commercial intuition, and natural leadership among the plantation workers. But he had also cultivated a sense of justice he previously did not possess, influenced by the presence of the brother who had known life from the reverse side. João became the most contemplative of the 3. He liked long walks through the coffee fields, deep conversations with Dom Esteban about philosophy and religion, and demonstrated artistic sensitivity that manifested in precise drawings of the rural landscape and impressive portraits of the family and workers. In 1864, when war rumors became reality, the atmosphere on the plantation changed again. Paraguay had declared war on Brazil, and young men from all over the country were drafted or enlisted voluntarily to defend the homeland. José, then 17, presented himself to his father on an autumn morning with determined expression, "Father, I want to enlist. The country needs brave men, and I learned from you that courage is facing what is necessary, not what is easy." Francisco looked at his firstborn son, tall, strong, with the ardent conviction of youth, and felt his chest tighten. But he recognized in that young man the same determination that had led him to recognize Joaquim, the same rectitude he had learned to value above social conveniences. "If that is your decision, you have my blessing," he responded, extending his hand to seal the agreement between men. José's farewell was emotional but dignified. Isabel had embroidered uniforms with a mother's care. Rosa had prepared foods that would last weeks on the journey. Dom Estevo had blessed the young man with prayers in Latin. Joaquim and João walked with their brother to the nearest train station, promising to care for the family and business in his absence. "Come back to meet your nephews," said João, embracing José on the station platform. "And to see the plantation even bigger," completed Joaquim, and there was in his voice a promise of hard work and dedication. With José at war, João gradually assumed administrative responsibilities, while Joaquim plunged into legal studies. Dom Estevo had brought law books from the capital, and the young mestizo devoured treatises on laws, constitutions, and jurisprudence with passion that impressed even the erudite priest. "Do you want to be a lawyer?" asked Isabel one afternoon, finding Joaquim in the library surrounded by thick volumes. "I want to defend people like Rosa, mother. People who need a voice in human justice, since they always had a voice only in God's justice." Isabel smiled, recognizing in her son the same moral determination that Francisco had demonstrated in recognizing him. Joaquim had grown not only in stature and knowledge, but in purpose. It was in 1867 that the news everyone feared and no one wanted to believe arrived. A laconic telegram informed that José had fallen in combat in Paraguayan territory, fighting with bravery until the last moment. The mourning that befell São José plantation was deep but not bitter. Francisco, aged in years by months of worry, found consolation in faith and pride for the son who had died defending his ideals. Isabel embroidered a shroud with José's initials and kept it in the family oratory, along with other sacred relics. Rosa, who had loved José as her own son, cried tears that mixed pain and gratitude. Pain for the loss, gratitude for having lived with that boy who had become a man of character. Joaquim and João became closer in shared grief. United by mourning, they developed a complicity that transcended blood fraternity. They were companions in dreams and responsibilities, each assuming aspects of the dead brother's personality. "José wanted the plantation to prosper," said João in one of those nocturnal conversations. "Let's make that happen. And he wanted us to be just," completed Joaquim, "just with all who work with us." The years that followed the war were of reconstruction and growth. The plantation prospered under the joint administration of João and Joaquim, each contributing with his particular talents. João cared for production and practical aspects. Joaquim occupied himself with legal questions and relations with workers. Rosa, who had completed 50 years, became official administrator of the house, respected by all as the de facto matriarch. Her practical wisdom and generous heart made her a sought-after counselor by both employers and employees. In 1875, when Francisco was stricken by a fever he could not overcome, he gathered his 2 surviving sons for a final council. "The land is ours, but we are also of it. Take good care of what we built, but always remember, the true inheritance is not the coffee that is harvested, it is the character that is planted." He died on a Sunday morning, surrounded by the family that had learned to love without prejudices. Joaquim and João officially became partners in the property's administration, continuing their father's work with the same rectitude and vision of the future. The fruits of Francisco's courage were beginning to ripen. São José Plantation became a reference in the region not only for the quality of its coffee, but for the just manner in which it treated its workers. And Joaquim, the boy who was almost thrown away on a stormy night, grew as a respected lawyer who defended lost causes and forgotten people. What destiny awaited that family united by true love? The year 1880 brought to the Paraíba Valley winds of change that blew from the capital and spread through the plantations like seeds carried by the breeze. Joaquim, now 29 years old, had graduated in law from the Academy of São Paulo and returned to São José Plantation not only as son and partner, but as a man of causes and deep convictions. His office, installed in a room that had been converted in the big house, received unusual visits by regional standards. Fugitive slaves sought legal guidance, poor families looked for defense against power abuses, small merchants needed fair contracts. Joaquim attended to all with the same dedication, charging fees proportional to each client's possibilities. João had developed as an exemplary administrator. The plantation prospered under his careful and innovative management. He had introduced modern planting techniques, improved workers' housing conditions, established a profit-sharing system that was revolutionary for the time. São José's coffee fields produced superior quality beans that were disputed by merchants from Rio de Janeiro and São Paulo. Isabel, at 57, had become a lady of rare elegance and wisdom. Her hands, previously occupied only with ornamental embroidery, now dedicated themselves to sewing clothes for workers' children, preparing home remedies for the sick, teaching first letters to children of the region. Late motherhood had flourished in her like a garden that finally finds the right season. Rosa, at 67, remained as the pulsing heart of the house. Her memory held stories of 3 generations, her advice was sought by all, her hands still prepared the most flavorful foods in the valley. Rita had married and lived on a nearby plantation, but regularly visited her mother, bringing grandchildren who filled the house with laughter and running. Dom Estevan, though aged, continued as the family's spiritual counselor. His Sunday homilies in the plantation chapel attracted faithful from neighboring properties, for his words echoed not only faith, but social justice and love for one's neighbor. It was on a September afternoon that a young journalist from the capital arrived at the plantation, sent to write about the transformations occurring in the interior. Joaquim received him in the library, surrounded by books that had become his weapons of combat against injustices. "Dr. Joaquim," said the journalist, a man of about 30 with lively eyes of one who seeks true stories, "I heard that you defend abolitionist causes. Is it true?" "I defend justice," responded Joaquim, his voice serene but firm, "and there is no justice where men are property of other men." "But you were born on a coffee plantation. Isn't that contradictory?" Joaquim smiled, and in that smile was both the sweetness he had learned from Rosa and the determination he had inherited from Francisco. "I was born on a coffee plantation, it's true, but I was also born to transform that plantation. My father taught me that courage is not keeping things as they are, it's changing them to how they should be." The interview extended through the afternoon. The journalist met João, conversed with Isabel, heard Rosa's stories, observed working conditions on the property. When he departed, he carried with him not only material for the newspaper, but the understanding that change was possible when accompanied by love and determination. The article published weeks later caused repercussion throughout the province. "The Plantation That Prepares the Future" was the title, and the text described São José as a model of just transition between slave labor and free labor. Joaquim was portrayed as a lawyer who fought for abolition not only in the courts, but through practical example. The repercussion brought positive and negative consequences. Progressive farmers sought Joaquim for consultation on how to modernize their properties. Merchants offered better prices for São José coffee, recognizing its ethical origin, but pressures also came from conservative sectors, veiled threats of boycotts and retaliations. João and Joaquim faced these pressures united, as they always had since recognizing themselves as brothers. In a meeting with regional farmers, João publicly defended his brother's positions. Joaquim speaks not only as a lawyer, but as a man who knows both the big house and the quarters. His words carry the authority of one who lived in both realities. In 1885, when debates about abolition intensified in the provincial assembly, Joaquim was invited to testify as an expert. His presentation, clear and emotional, caused profound impact on the deputies. "Honorable legislators, I speak to you as the son of a farmer and grandson of a slave. I speak as one who knows the taste of freedom and the bitterness of exclusion. Abolition is not only a legal question, it is a moral question. It is not only freeing the slaves, it is freeing the conscience of a nation." His words were reproduced in the capital's newspapers and cited in abolitionist speeches throughout the country. Joaquim had become a respected voice in the movement that grew like an unstoppable tide. At São José Plantation, changes continued gradually. Slave workers were gradually replaced by free workers, many of whom were the former slaves themselves, who chose to remain for fair wages and dignified conditions. Rosa supervised this transition with the wisdom of one who knew the heart of each person involved. "Freedom without work is abandonment," she said to those who questioned whether former slaves could adapt. "Work without freedom is slavery, but work with freedom is dignity." In 1888, when news of the Golden Law's signing finally arrived, São José Plantation was already prepared. The transition had been gradual, planned, humanized. No worker was abandoned to his own fate. No family was separated. No child was left without education. The celebration was discreet but profound. Joachim gathered all workers in the big house courtyard for a simple ceremony. Rosa, as the eldest and most respected, was invited to speak. "Today is not only the day of legal freedom," she said, her voice still strong at 75. "It is the day Brazil finally decided to grow, and we here at São José helped this young country take its first firm steps." Joachim embraced Rosa publicly, and in that embrace were 3 decades of gratitude. The woman who had saved him as a baby, who had raised him with love, who had educated him with wisdom, was now recognized by all as the family's true matriarch. That night, in the intimacy of the library, João and Joachim conversed about the future. "José would be proud," said João, observing through the window the workers who discreetly celebrated their new condition. "Father too," completed Joachim. "He planted seeds of justice. We only watered them with persistence." The echo of freedom resounded throughout the Paraíba Valley, but nowhere did it sound stronger than at São José Plantation, where 3 brothers had learned that true love knows no color, class, or origin. What legacy would they leave for future generations? The first years after abolition brought challenges that tested not only the economic structure of São José Plantation, but also the ideals that Joachim and João had cultivated. Many neighbors faced severe financial difficulties with the transition from slave labor to free labor, but São José prospered because the change had been gradual and careful. Joachim had expanded his law office, now installed in its own building in the outskirts of the nearest city. He defended former slaves who faced discrimination, small rural proprietors who fought against land grabbers, families who sought legal recognition of their unions. His name was respected in regional courts, and his reputation for integrity opened doors that previously remained closed to causes considered lost. João dedicated himself entirely to modernizing the plantation. He had introduced machinery imported from Europe, established commercial partnerships with European buyers who valued the ethical origin of São José coffee, created a school within the property where workers' children learned not only to read and write, but also practical trades that would guarantee dignified sustenance. Isabel, at 65, had become the plantation school's official teacher. Her classroom functioned in the former main quarters, transformed and decorated with maps, books, and colored drawings. She saw in the children she taught the materialization of dreams she had cherished since accepting Joachim as her true son. Rosa, though over 70, remained active as counselor and living memory of the property. Her stories, told on full moon nights in the big house courtyard, preserved traditions and teachings that united different generations. She was sought by both old and new residents to resolve conflicts, give matrimonial advice, indicate natural remedies. It was in 1892 that a proposal arrived that would test the family's values. A group of English investors offered an extraordinary amount for São José Plantation, with the condition of transforming it into a modern company in industrial molds, with external administration and reduced workforce. The proposal was debated in a family meeting that included not only João and Joachim, but also Isabel, Rosa, and Dom Estevão. The financial advantages were evident, but the human implications worried everyone. "It would be a betrayal of everything we built," said Joachim, walking through the library as he always did when he needed to think. "We cannot abandon the people who trusted us. But we also cannot ignore that this sale would give us resources to invest in even bigger projects," pondered João. "We could buy abandoned lands and create several plantations in the same molds as São José." Isabel, seated in the chair that had been her husband's, observed her sons with the pride of one who saw them discuss not personal interests, but social responsibilities. "Francisco always said the land is ours, but we are also of it. The question is, by selling São José, will we be faithful to the land or to the people?" Rosa, who had remained silent, slowly stood up. "May I speak?" Everyone turned to her, recognizing the moral authority that her age and experience conferred upon her. "You know I spent my whole life on this land. I saw 3 generations born, saw others die. São José is not just land and coffee, it is soul and memory. If you sell to foreigners who don't know our history, it will be like uprooting a centennial tree to plant a different one." Dom Estevão nodded gravely. "Rosa is right. There are values that cannot be measured in currency. São José became a symbol that change is possible when it comes from the heart, not just from interest." The decision was unanimous. The proposal would be refused, but the discussion had planted seeds of a new idea. If they could not sell São José, they could use their experience to transform other properties. Joaquim and João initiated an ambitious project: create a cooperative of progressive farmers who would share knowledge, resources, and ideals. They bought abandoned lands, offered free consultation to proprietors interested in modernizing their practices, established a mutual support network that extended throughout the Paraíba Valley. The New Valley Cooperative, as it was baptized, had become in a few years a national reference. Delegations from other states visited their associated properties to learn social transition techniques, sustainable production methods, rural educational systems. Joaquim was frequently invited for lectures in the capital, where he defended his ideas before audiences of politicians, intellectuals, and businessmen. His presentations combined economic data with personal testimonies, productivity statistics with human stories. "The future of rural Brazil is not in copying foreign models," he said in one of those lectures, his voice echoing in the packed auditorium, "but in creating a Brazilian model that respects our land, our people, our history." João complemented his brother's work in the practical part. He constantly traveled between associated plantations, supervising implementations, solving technical problems, training local administrators. His ability to reconcile economic efficiency with social justice impressed even the most convinced skeptics. In 1895, when Rosa completed 80 years, the family organized a celebration that became a landmark in the region. Representatives from all plantations associated with the cooperative came to pay homage to the woman who symbolized the wisdom and resistance of an entire generation. The party was held in the big house courtyard, decorated with colorful flags and garden flowers. Rosa, seated in a chair specially ornamented for the occasion, received compliments and gifts like a queen of a kingdom built on love. Joaquim made an emotional speech. "Rosa taught us that family is not blood, it is choice. That love is not privilege, it is right. That education is not luxury, it is necessity. She planted in us the seeds of everything we are today," João completed. "And she taught us that roots should be deep, but wings should be free. That we can fly high without forgetting where we came from." Rosa, moved but maintaining the dignity that always characterized her, responded with her voice still firm. "You were my joy and my pride. Seeing São José transform into what it is today is my reward for a life lived with love." That night, after the guests departed and the house returned to its habitual quietude, Rosa conversed alone with Joaquim in the kitchen, where so many confidences had been shared over the years. "You know I won't live forever," she said without drama or self-pity. "Rosa, let me speak. When I depart, I want you to know that my life had meaning because I saved you that March night. Everything that happened afterward was a consequence of that choice." Joaquim kissed the wrinkled forehead of the woman who had raised him, breathing the lavender perfume she always used. "You didn't save me only that night, Rosa. You save me every day, with your example, with your wisdom, with your unconditional love." São José's roots had deepened over decades, nourishing a family tree that transcended blood and included all who chose to love without conditions. And the wings that grew on that tree carried seeds of hope to distant lands, planting futures that were yet to flourish. What destiny awaited that inheritance of love? The new century arrived at São José plantation, loaded with transformations that echoed through the corridors of Brazilian history. The year 1900 brought with it a republic still young, discovering its own steps, and a nation that learned to balance tradition and modernity. Joaquim, now 49 years old, had married Helena, a teacher from São Paulo whom he had met during one of his trips for lectures. Helena had brought to São José not only her love, but also innovative ideas about female education and social assistance. Together, they had expanded the plantation school until transforming it into a recognized institution that received students from the entire region. João had remained single by choice, dedicating himself entirely to cooperative administration and the development of new agricultural techniques. His experiments with natural fertilization and crop rotation had revolutionized the productivity of associated lands, and his methods were studied even by European specialists. Isabel, at 68, continued teaching at the school, but now shared responsibilities with Helena and other young teachers who arrived full of enthusiasm and modern knowledge. She had found in children's education an inexhaustible source of joy and purpose. Rosa had completed her 85 years as the respected and beloved matriarch of all. Though slower in movements, her mind remained lucid, and her influence over the plantation's important decisions was unquestionable. She spent afternoons on the big house veranda, knitting little clothes for Rita's grandchildren and telling stories to the school children. Dom Estevo, though aged, remained active as spiritual counselor. His Sunday masses in the plantation chapel attracted faithful from neighboring properties, for his homilies combined traditional faith with contemporary social concerns. It was during one of those Sunday masses that news arrived that would again change the family's course. A young lawyer from Rio de Janeiro, descendant of freed slaves, sought Joaquim for a special consultation. He brought with him ancient documents and a story that connected past and present in surprising form. The young man was called Miguel and was the grandson of Esperanza, not the goat that had fed baby Joaquim, but the slave that Rosa had mentioned in her stories, one of the former residents of the abandoned quarters who had died of cholera years before the triplet's birth. "Dr. Joaquim," said Miguel, seated in the library where so many important decisions had been made, "my grandmother left documents that prove the existence of a treasure buried in the old quarters, not gold or silver, but letters and objects that document the history of slaves who lived at San Jose." Joaquim listened with growing interest. Miguel explained that Esperanza had been one of the few literate slaves in the region who had secretly documented births, deaths, marriages, and personal stories of captivity companions. Before dying, she had buried those documents in a metal box, hoping that someday someone would find them and preserve the memory of her people. "I would like to excavate on the site with your permission," requested Miguel. Those documents could have invaluable historical value. The search was immediately authorized. João, Joaquim, Rosa, and even Isabel accompanied the excavations in the old quarters where Joaquim had been raised. Helena organized the presence of school children, transforming the search into a practical history lesson. When they finally found the metal box, rusted but preserved, the emotion was general. Rosa cried upon recognizing objects that had belonged to dear friends: a carved wooden comb, a rosary of tear beads, Saint medals worn by loving use. But it was the documents that caused the greatest impact. Letters written by slaves to distant relatives, improvised birth and marriage certificates, natural medicine recipes, even poems and songs that preserved African traditions. Among the papers, a special surprise awaited Joaquim. A letter written by Esperanza years before dying, addressed to the boy who would be born to transform San Jose. It was as if she had foreseen not only Joaquim's birth, but also his destiny. "I write these words for the child who has not yet been born, but whom I know will come," said the letter in careful calligraphy. "He will be born between two worlds and will learn to unite them. He will be rejected first, accepted later, and will become a bridge where others see only abyss. May he know that he carries within himself the strength of all of us who departed and the hope of all who remained." The reading of the letter was done aloud in the big house courtyard, with all plantation residents present. When Joaquim finished, the silence was deep and reverent. It was as if the spirits of the past were there, blessing the present and guiding the future. Rosa, moved beyond words, asked to hold the letter. "Esperanza always said that some babies are born with a star on their forehead," she murmured, her eyes shining. "Now I understand why you survived alone in that quarters for 5 days. You weren't alone. You were protected by all the ancestors who came before." Miguel proposed creating a museum in the old quarters, preserving not only the documents found, but all of San Jose's history as an example of social transformation. The idea was enthusiastically accepted by the entire family. The San Jose Memory Museum was inaugurated a year later, in a ceremony that attracted visitors from all over the country. Joaquim gave the opening speech before an audience that included politicians, intellectuals, descendants of slaves, and regional farmers. This museum does not only celebrate the past, but inspires the future. Every document preserved here is proof that human dignity cannot be bought or sold, only recognized or denied, and we choose to recognize it in every person who steps on this land. Rosa, now 87 and supported by a cane carved by João, was invited to cut the inaugural ribbon. Her trembling hands held the scissors like they would hold a blessing, and when the ribbon broke, applause and tears mixed in an emotion that transcended words. Helena had organized a choir with the school children, who sang a song specially composed for the occasion. The melody spoke of African roots, suffering and resistance, love and hope, freedom and responsibility. It was the musical synthesis of a story that finally found voice. That night, after visitors departed and the plantation returned to its habitual quietude, 3 generations gathered on the big house veranda. Rosa, Isabel and Helena represented the wisdom of different epochs, while João and Joaquim symbolized the strength of the present, and children running through the garden embodied the promises of the future. "It seems like yesterday I found you crying in the quarters," said Rosa, observing Joaquim, who now had graying hair and wrinkles that told stories of leadership and compassion. "To me it seems like it was 1,000 years ago," he responded, smiling. "So much happened, so many lives changed. And much more will still change," completed João, pointing to the children playing. "They will inherit a world different from what we knew." Isabel, knitting a blanket that would be donated to the neighboring city's orphanage, murmured thoughtfully, "Francisco would be proud." "We planted justice and harvested love." Time's circle continued turning at São José plantation, but now with the certainty that each revolution brought not only change, but also permanence of values that truly mattered. The abandoned quarters had transformed into a museum. The secret had become public history, and the rejected boy had become a symbol of transformation. What final legacy would seal this journey of love and redemption? The autumn of 1905 arrived at São José plantation, tinting the IPA leaves gold and carrying in the winds a presentiment that Rosa felt in her aged bones. At 90 years old, she maintained crystal lucidity, but her body had become fragile like ancient porcelain, beautiful and venerable, but conscious of its finitude. It was a March afternoon, exactly 54 years after that storm that had forever changed the family's destinies, when Rosa asked to speak alone with Joaquim, João, and Isabel. Helena had taken the school children for a walk through the coffee fields, Dom Esteban was organizing the library, and the big house breathed that special quietude of autumn afternoons. Rosa was seated in the mahogany armchair that Francisco had used in life, now positioned on the veranda, where she could observe the entire valley that extended before her eyes. She held in her lap a carved wooden box that no one had ever seen her open, and on her face was an expression that blended serenity and determination. "The time has come for you to know some things I kept during an entire lifetime," she said, her voice still firm despite advanced age. Joaquim, João and Isabel sat in chairs brought especially for the occasion. There was something solemn in that moment, as if they witnessed not only a conversation, but a ritual of testimony passage. "Rosa, you don't need to," began Isabel, but the elderly woman interrupted with a gentle gesture of her hand. "I do need to, my daughter. There are truths that cannot die with me." She opened the wooden box with reverent care. Inside were letters yellowed by time, a small metal object and something wrapped in faded cotton cloth. "Joachim," she said, looking directly into the eyes of the man she had raised, "you always wondered why your skin wasn't the same as your brother's, didn't you?" "Sometimes," he admitted, intrigued by the seriousness of the moment. "And you, Isabel, always carried guilt for rejecting your son that stormy night." Isabel lowered her eyes, the weight of decades of remorse evident in her expression. Rosa removed from the box a carefully preserved letter. The paper had the color of dry straw, and the ink had faded until almost disappearing, but it was still possible to read the words written in elegant calligraphy. "This letter arrived here 3 days after your births," said Rosa, her voice loaded with emotion. "Here it was brought by a free man who had received it from a Portuguese merchant." She extended the letter to Joaquim, who received it with trembling hands. As he read, his face lost color, his eyes widening in growing comprehension. "Read aloud," requested Rosa. With a choked voice, Joaquim began, "To the family of Colonel Francisco Vasconcelos, São José Plantation. I write this letter loaded with pain and hope. My name is Antonio Henrique Silveira. I am a Portuguese merchant who maintains business in the port of Santos. During my last trip to Brazil, I met a slave of exceptional beauty called Benedicta, who worked in a Rio de Janeiro merchant's house." Joaquim stopped, looking at Rosa with mute question in his eyes. "Continue," she encouraged. "I recognize that I committed a sin in society's eyes by becoming involved with this woman, but I can affirm before God that our love was true and sincere. Benedicta became pregnant, but before I could take measures to free her and marry her, she was sold to an unidentified region. I spent 2 years searching for her without success." The letter continued explaining that the Portuguese had discovered, through a network of merchants, that Benedicta had been sold to a plantation in the Paraíba Valley, where she had given birth to a child. He offered a generous amount to buy the freedom of mother and son, besides officially recognizing paternity. "I know this letter may cause embarrassment to the family that receives it, but I appeal to Christian charity and human justice. An innocent child should not pay for adults' sins. If you found this woman and this child, I ask that you write to me at the address below. I am willing to assume all responsibilities." When Joachim finished reading, the silence was absolute. Rosa then removed from the box the metal object. It was a ring with engraved coat of arms, the same coat of arms that appeared on the letter's seal. "Benedicta was my sister," said Rosa, her voice almost a whisper. "2 years younger than me. When they brought her here, she was already 6 months pregnant. She died in childbirth, giving birth to you, Joachim. I knew who your true father was." Isabel brought her hands to her face, sobbing. "Why didn't you tell us before? Why did you keep the secret for so long?" Rosa looked at her with infinite understanding. "Because you needed to learn to love Joachim for who he was, not who they wanted him to be. If you had known he was Portuguese's son, perhaps your love would have been based on his European origin, not on his person." João, who had remained silent until then, asked, "And the Portuguese? Antonio Silveira?" "He died 3 years after writing this letter, a plague that devastated Lisbon. But he left a will recognizing Joachim as legal heir." Rosa removed the last item from the box, the cotton wrapper. Inside was a gold chain with engraved medal and documents in Portuguese. "These are your inheritance papers, Joachim. You are heir to properties in Lisbon and Porto, a rich man if you so choose." Joachim held the documents as if they weighed tons. His entire life, his entire identity, all his convictions about origin and destiny had just been rewritten in a few minutes. "Why do you tell me this now?" he asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. Rosa smiled, and in that smile was all the wisdom of 9 decades of life. "Because now you are strong enough to know who you are without forgetting who you became. You are the son of a Portuguese and grandson of an African, heir to 2 lands and citizen of a 3rd. But above all, you are the boy I raised with love, whom Francisco recognized with courage, whom Isabel accepted with humility." "The inheritance," began João. "The Portuguese inheritance belongs to Joachim by right," said Rosa, interrupting, "but I know he will make the right choice." Joachim stood up, walked to the veranda balustrade, and contemplated the valley that extended before him. The coffee fields, the school, the museum, the workers' houses, everything they had built together was there, tangible and real. When he turned to the others, there was a serene determination in his eyes. "Antonio Silveira's inheritance will be used to expand our school and create others throughout Brazil. A man I never knew gave me origin, but you gave me life. This land, these people, these dreams, this is my true inheritance." Rosa closed her eyes, a peaceful smile illuminating her wrinkled face. "I knew you would say that. That's why I waited so long to tell you. You needed to be ready to choose love over gold, family over fortune." That March afternoon on the big house veranda where so many stories had been written, the Vasconcelos family discovered that the mysteries of the past had been revealed not to divide, but to unite even more. The hidden truths emerged like flowers that bloom after a long season of rains, beautiful not for being new, but for finally being able to grow in sunlight. The great revelation of the heart was that true love needs no explanations or origins. It simply is, grows and multiplies, independent of blood, color, or origin. How would this discovery transform the family's final destiny? 10 years had passed since Rosa's revelation about Joachim's true origin. San Jose Plantation had transformed into what Francisco never imagined. When he recognized the abandoned son on that distant January afternoon, it had become a national symbol of social transformation and rural education. Joachim's Portuguese inheritance, as he had promised, was entirely invested in creating the Esperança Educational Foundation, a network of rural schools that spread across 3 provinces. Helena directed the pedagogical project. João administered the resources, and Joachim supervised the legal and political expansion of the initiative. Rosa had departed peacefully on a September morning in 1910, at 95 years old, surrounded by all those she loved. Her last words were for Joachim. "You became everything I dreamed and much more." Her funeral gathered more than 1,000 people, including former slaves who traveled from distant states to pay homage to the woman who symbolized dignity and resistance. Isabel, at 78, remained active as honorary director of the schools. Her hands, which once rejected the newborn son, now dedicated themselves entirely to caressing children of all colors and origins. She had found in childhood education a form of redemption that transcended any religious penance. Dom Estevo, though over 80, continued as the family's spiritual counselor and chaplain of the schools, His homilies had become famous in the region for combining Christian faith with social justice, inspiring a generation of young religious people committed to social transformation. In 1915, when Brazil was preparing to enter the World War, São José Plantation received the most important visit in its history. The President of the Republic, accompanied by ministers and educators, came to personally know the experience that was being studied by European pedagogues. The reception was simple but elegant, following the protocol that Isabel had learned from Francisco, but adapted to the egalitarian values the family had developed. Workers, teachers, students, and authorities shared the same table at lunch served in the big house courtyard. Joaquim, now 64 with completely white hair, personally conducted the presidential visit. They showed classrooms where children of different origins studied together, laboratories where young people learned modern agricultural techniques, the library that preserved both European classics and African memories. "Dr. Joaquim," said the president, impressed with everything he saw, "you created here a model that should be replicated throughout the country. How did you achieve such social integration?" Joaquim smiled, observing a room where white, black, and mulatto children sang in chorus under Helena's direction. "Your Excellency, we created nothing new. We only applied a very ancient truth. All children are equal when treated with love and respect." "But were there resistances?" "Social difficulties. Many," admitted João, who accompanied the visit, "but we discovered that resistance to the new lasts little when the results of the new are evident." The president also visited the Memory Museum, where the history of slavery was told, without romanticization or victimization, but as a surpassed chapter of a growing nation. He read preserved documents, observed rescued objects, listened to recordings of former slaves telling their experiences. In the museum's main hall, a portrait of Rosa occupied a place of honor, flanked by photographs of Francisco, Isabel, José, João, and Joaquim in different epochs. It was the gallery of a family that had learned to grow through challenges. "This woman," said the president, observing Rosa's portrait, "was a national heroine." "She was our mother," responded Joaquim simply. The most moving moment of the visit was the ceremony in the old quarters where Joaquim had been raised. Helena had organized a presentation by children telling the plantation's history through songs, dances, and small theatrical representations. When an 8-year-old black girl interpreted Rosa saving baby Joaquim, there wasn't a dry eye in the audience. The story that had begun in tragedy and secret had transformed into a public example of redemption and hope. The president, visibly moved, gave a speech that would be remembered in Brazilian education history. What we witness today at São José is not only pedagogical success or social experiment, it is the practical demonstration that Brazil can be a nation where origin does not determine destiny, where the past teaches but does not imprison, where family is built on love, not only on blood. Before departing, the president signed a decree creating National Rural Education Day to be commemorated annually on Joaquim's birthday anniversary. That March 15th at 64 years ago had marked not only a birth, but the beginning of a transformation. That night, after authorities departed and the plantation returned to its habitual quietude, the family gathered in the library for an intimate conversation. Isabel, João, Joaquim, Helena, and some of the oldest teachers sat in the same arrangement that decades before had witnessed revelations and important decisions. "Francisco would be proud," said Isabel, knitting a little blanket for the first great-grandchild, son of one of the school's former students. "Rosa, too," completed João. "She always said we planted seeds for future harvests." Joaquim stood up and walked to the shelf where he kept the family's most precious documents. He removed Antonio Silveira's original letter, the modified birth certificate that Francisco had signed in 1860, photographs of Rosa in different epochs, drawings that children made of Grandma Rosa. "Do you know what I learned in all these years?" he said, observing the documents. "That family is not who gives us origin, but who chooses to accompany us on the journey. That education is not privilege, but right. That love has no color, class, or origin." Helena approached and took her husband's hand, "and that every child deserves the chance to become who they dream to be, independent of where or how they were born," added João. At 10 o'clock at night, as was tradition since Francisco's times, the family gathered for the day's final prayer. But now the prayer included not only those present, but all who had passed through São José, freed slaves, educated children, trained teachers, authorities, converted to ideas of social justice. The next morning, Joaquim woke early and walked alone to the small plantation cemetery where Francisco, Rosa, and José rested. He carried flowers picked from the garden that Isabel still cultivated at 78. Before Rosa's tomb, he knelt and whispered, "Thank you, Mother, for saving me, for raising me, for teaching me that love is not explained, it is lived. The seed you planted that stormy night transformed into a forest that shelters hundreds of families. The morning wind blew through the coffee fields, carrying the perfume of flowers that Helena had planted in homage to those who departed. It was a gentle wind, like a blessing from one who observes from afar the continuity of work begun in life." When Joaquim rose, he saw in the distance children running to school, their voices mixing in a symphony of laughter and songs. They were children of former slaves and descendants of immigrants, adopted orphans and farmers' heirs, all equally loved and educated. In that moment, he understood that Rosa had not saved only one child on that tempestuous night in 1851. She had saved the future of hundreds of children yet to be born, had planted seeds of justice that would bear fruit for generations. San Jose Plantation remained as a beacon of hope in the Paraíba Valley, radiating light that reached distant horizons. The secret that Rosa had kept for 9 years had transformed into public truth that inspired nations, and in Joaquim's eternally grateful heart echoed the certainty that true love knows no limits of time or space. It continues growing and multiplying, even after those who planted it already rest in the earth that saw them struggle and triumph. The legacy of Rosa, Francisco, Isabel, João, and all who chose love over prejudice was guaranteed for eternity, not in stone monuments, but in the hearts of children who learned, in families that formed, in dreams that came true. The storm of March 1851 had finally ceased. In its place shone the serene sun of a future built on hope and founded on unconditional love.